Unsurprisingly, there are multiple factions within Blizzard, and the Discord server used by one of these factions within the company has came to light. Now, there's a bunch of stuff that I think obviously would spread a fair bit because of its nature, but also there are some key bits of information that we can actually glean from what these employees, well, ex-employee for one of them at least, from what they're actually saying to each other. A lot of people have been wondering, where are the staff? Have they had staffing issues? Are people quitting? Well, we actually do have a little bit of information on that. So, let's dive into the drama, though. Of course, Matt, we won't be able to do this without talking about why this has all blown up. Mm-hmm. So let's just hop in. Drama's been happening really everywhere throughout the games industry. Today, though, it is, of course, around Blizzard's ongoing story, but it specifically is about the direction that the company is going in, how not everybody in that company is accepting that direction, how it's got a little bit rough with the internal communications at times, and the story of Geoff Frazier, a 23-year employee of the company working on web content. Now, Geoff was found, right, trying to sell his Blizzard service rewards on eBay. Now, apparently it's allegedly illegal to sell some of them, which I thought was interesting, but at the very least, I'm fairly sure they signed something that says they don't do that.
Yeah.
And I imagine through like serial numbers and stuff, it would probably be pretty damn easy to track these things down.
Yeah, I imagine it's likely something to do with it being in their contract even after they're gone, where they're not allowed to just sell them off, although you do see plenty selling them, so it's like, unless it's something to do with the fact that, one of them's a sword, but I imagine not.
Yeah. So Geoff was found doing this, and funny enough, this all did end up going in a dramatic direction. So, because it turns out that this Geoff Frazier also is somebody who has recently been fired in the wake of all of the recent changes going on at the company. And according to his LinkedIn, he was fired in late September, early October. Now then, this is where Jessica Gonzalez comes in again. So she opened a HR case on him for many reasons, and that he had reported her for being toxic when she started advocating for D&I initiatives. That's the sort of thing. Obviously, she took very much the stance. I think at some point the cup ran over, and it was time to take it all to Twitter. I think, obviously, there will be some degree of disagreement from some people about taking that direction from within the company. Yeah,
to be completely clear about her role in it all, she effectively seems to be almost the tip of the spear or figurehead for a large number of QA and support and community team members. Basically, seemingly everyone who is specifically when it comes to workers' rights and the union kind of side of things, very much the people who aren't the core developers who are largely treated better in the industry. It was okay, here's everyone that's underrepresented in terms of the payment, workers' rights, holiday time, all that stuff. Ended up being I can't imagine it was on purpose, but ended up being the figurehead for them all. Yeah. So obviously, if you're going to have any criticisms with those people, you'll address them towards her.
So it's interesting because this whole story about the eBay listing appeared, and then she is kind of oh, hey, funny story about this guy.
Yep.
So basically, she starts to reveal a whole bunch of information on him, and this is what starts to spread on Twitter and get picked up in some of the press. So, allegedly, Geoff Frazier tried to get her fired using his tenure, but it turned out that everybody that he had sway with in her department had already left. Of course, that's her account of things, but evidently, she ended up leaving the company, and he did end up getting fired. Now, it was apparent that he was reported to HR by multiple people in the past, but he always had been protected. So he probably, being a very tenured member of staff, knew people in the right place. Now, this is where we move on to a Discord server. This is where a lot of the recent dramas came from, called The Right Wing of Gaming. Now, here, he leaked employee information, objectified interns, outed trans staff, and more. And going through, and there's a lot of screenshots from this Discord floating around, going through, basically venting.
Yeah.
Frazier is venting. Now, in a part of that, that's trash talking, that's talking shit about people, but also in a way that does reveal some employee and company information.
Yes.
So, as an example, a longtime World of Warcraft developer also highlighted messages where they were being made fun of by Geoff and other people on that server. He had horrible things to say about Jessica Gonzalez specifically, which, of course, is no surprise given her Twitter.
Yep.
I mean, you could maybe say these people are going to naturally be butting heads. Now, more than just people having different opinions or maybe him disagreeing with her methods, there's also the likes of, including that she's using her, quote, army of QA/support to get people fired and, quote, ruining the whole company plus ratting everyone out to the government. Which is the sort of thing, certainly you're insinuating she has a great deal of power in all of this, but in the modern age, social media sway and the ability to get headlines actually is power, isn't it?
Yeah.
And if anything, these stories are an example of hard power, so a company with all of its resources, not mattering that much in comparison to soft power, which has been working quite well for the anti-Blizz.
Yeah, it's one thing we've been saying whenever it comes to companies and things happening in them. We talk about, losing the narrative, and that's an example of that, where it doesn't matter how rich you are as a company, if people have such a bad opinion of you, they won't want to work for you. Or your name is dirt, your reputation's dirt, so what you have doesn't actually matter. So it's interesting. I did think it was interesting that he specifically said ratting everyone out to the government, because as far as I can tell, I mean, I've not, went through all of the lawsuits and with a fine-tooth comb, but everything that I would consider being ratted out is something that, should be ratted out because it's horrible behavior.
I'm fairly sure that, hey, I was touched inappropriately. I don't think that's ratting out to the government. I think that's, following the right channels.
Certainly a weird way to talk about it.
So, maybe in support of all of this, Geoff did have a blog, Nebuchadnezzar, where he was apparently going on, political rants, a little bit more in the aggressive direction. Of course, that's obviously something that happens for every side of the political spectrum, but you could definitely say more of a highly engaged, bit more inflammatory character.
Yeah,
just you're obviously going to find everywhere, including in Blizzard.
Yep.
Now, could actually be people were kind of poking fun at him anyway for this. Maybe possibly. He was one of those people who's just a little bit too hardcore. A little bit, okay, Geoff, we get it, calm down. Because this isn't Diablo 2. So this could have been something in his nature that was even a joke to the Diablo 2 Battle.net staff, because a fictional creature made for an April Fool's joke was in fact named after him. He was part of the staff, so probably it's just a tongue-in-cheek thing, but often, that's a jab with a point. And for this it is, spawned from the very bowels of the skulking Stygian beast who awakens only once every 1,000 years to feed off the spawn of its own bile and pus, the Resiarf, or whatever, which by the way is Geoff Frazier, spelled backwards, is truly the most hideous and vile monster in all of the Three's bestiary. So, that's just a little bit of Diablo 2 in jokes for him.
Yeah, I mean, even if you, are happy to have that said about you because you kind of self-identify with it, you can kind of get you get a hint of this person's character in that they are inflammatory, they are, they're so vilely feed off its own bile and pus, that kind of stuff. The kind of, that person in the corner, don't mind them. They're not bad once you get to know them, but they're a wee bit out there. That kind of character, I think.
And then as for the stuff that appeared in the server, you've obviously got to take this into account with the general social media environment, what people generally think. Obviously, this is not going to be the most fit for public consumption discussion that's ever happened, right? So if you basically go through a lot of the stuff from Frazier, it is, if you're, let's just say, trans person, maybe if you're a lesbian, if you are a owner of the boobs, perhaps they are large. They're going to be called out by Geoff. You sort of go through all of this, and generally some of the ists are coming in, maybe some of the isms are coming in. Bit of the objectification, those sort of things going on, which that's look. There's one guy, obviously, but there's one guy who is in this server, and then it starts to make us think about factions. Now, for some of the people who are going to see this and think, well, is this signal or is this noise? That's an interesting discussion that we will have. But potentially some more hard facts could be gleaned from this. And this is one thing we found to be quite interesting, because according to him, at the end of June, Blizzard is well and truly being eradicated and management are failing massively. Huge amounts of hiring are going on. HR, PR, and marketing staff are quitting. Now, we think he's likely exaggerating a little bit, as people would tend to do if they are talking shit in Discord. But there's probably a kernel of truth in there.
Yeah, it's specifically when you say something like all the PR quit but 2, that's the kind of thing that you're not going to exaggerate. That's a specific number, so you're less likely to exaggerate those. For stuff like, all the HR quit, all the hiring staff quit, okay, it's likely not all of them, but when it's all but 2 of PR, you're thinking, is it any wonder they don't have a handle on any narrative because they're running severely understaffed?
Yeah.
Or, as I believe he also says at points, is like he was on the web content team, and he is something like 30 Activision employees in that team versus like 4 Blizzard, where the balance used to be heavy on Blizzard because it was Battle.net stuff, which was obviously Blizzard's own thing, but now it's mostly staffed by Activision people. Then you imagine the same for those who are hiring for Blizzard, the same running PR for Blizzard, marketing, all that stuff. It's all just Activision staff because the Blizzard ones just went, I'm out of here, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's been doing the rounds in some of the networks is regarding the fate of the French office, where currently it's believed that is being centralized into Activision HQ in London.
Yeah.
Right? So it's no longer an operation of Blizzard Entertainment. It's now being handled by Activision. I think that pretty much, this stuff stands to reason.
Yep.
It's in line with what we generally hear. And in one of the recent stories we covered in Ubisoft, I think it was primarily NFTs, but one of the things that came up there was annual attrition rates. Yes. And Ubisoft, they were at 12%, which wasn't that good. But Activision Blizzard was at 16%. And there was other companies that I believe were 6% and 8%. Now you're just thinking, well, those are all, maybe low double digit, high single digit. But you got to remember, 16% is literally double 8.
Yeah.
So there is, there's companies in gaming that are having half the attrition that Blizzard's having, or Activision Blizzard. And perhaps if we're going to say that's Activision Blizzard, I mean, is it even worse in Blizzard because they've been a little bit more they felt the heat more. Yeah. I think potentially because some things were worse there, and then also because I don't think anybody ever had a special sort of relationship with Activision, but they did with Blizzard. So basically, as we see it, this is kind of what this all means, right? So this Geoff fella, he's now fired, okay? So I think with that, there's a little bit of an implication that the tide's kind of turning against his camp's favor, right? Because he aimed to get Jess fired. I believe he was kind of being a bit belligerent in some of those public channels.
Yes.
Suffice to say. And that didn't work for him. And ultimately, it seems like it didn't work because even sort of by his own admission, his people were no longer in her department, right? So the easy way to read this is a sort of a 2-faction war, right? You've got the good guys who want to unionize, make a healthy workspace, and the bad guys who are pro-harassment, pro-abuse. We don't think it's that simple.
No.
Generally, things are a bit more complex. Because it's not like Geoff and his kind of cohort were with, the side of management. They were generally pretty pissed off with management as well. Yes. Because I've basically seen people being like, screw all this corporate bullshit. We're here to make games. And then they kind of can skew off into different directions.
Yes.
As an example, the Geoff people, and then say the DE&I people. So, yes, there's likely here a bit of a third faction who don't like the management either, but also don't like the employees actively fighting back against the management. They don't like the specific direction that the employees are fighting, right? They're kind of think to themselves, well, maybe they kind of like the good old days. They like things back the way that it was when you're going into work with the lads, with a bunch of pints, maybe, a few shots, and you're all just ordering pizzas into the office, working stupid hours, getting up to all sorts of stuff. And, maybe in your mind, you're a merry bunch of fellows in some big game development quest, but perhaps from somebody else's perspective, it comes across extremely differently. And potentially these people are, obviously verging into the sorts of behaviors that have been reported throughout all of this. Yeah. So I imagine if you ask those people, that's probably how they would frame, where they want things to be. But I think obviously we know the other sides too. The good old days.
Yeah, I think that's...
Don't we?
Yeah, that's the problem when you have these, this, I guess, rose-tinted goggles portrayal of, back in the day it was all great. But that's likely down to not literally sharing the perspective of people who saw what was wrong.
Yes.
Or willfully, wanting it back, what they say, warts and all, because the bad stuff was worth it to these people if it meant they could also have the good stuff. But obviously, to people who had the worst side of it, no, that wasn't worth it in any capacity.
Yeah, I mean, basically, some of the opinion here is going to be a bit more along the lines of, well, we made great games, I had a bunch of fun, and I don't have titties, I don't have this stuff. Nobody's oogling at me, nobody's giving me an unsolicited back rub. I'm just having beers with the boys. It's all fine. It's all fun. So completely blind to. Yeah. To what to how things are actually going. And then it's like, well, if he was protected by the old management, right, even though that whole couldn't get Jess fired because his people weren't in her department, well, is that the same sorts of people who were protecting McCree and Afrasabi? And certainly if you look into what at least Afrasabi was doing, which you know a bit more about, I mean, oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no, not good indeed. So basically, it's hard to say, but I think you can quite obviously see how there will be in a company like Blizzard, there'll be a split in opinion. A lot of the newer staff are going to have, say, a different set of sensibilities to the older staff. And I think that is absolutely leading to maybe a bit of an old school versus a new school.
Yeah.
It's that tricky thing. I think the old school, though, are definitely, sort of thing, unless they are kind of getting a little bit to the new program, they're going to feel very left behind by all this stuff. I think they're then maybe going to feel potentially quite bitter and quite angry.
Yeah, I think there's a very sort of fine line to keep everything that was good while you're actually moving forward, because people who aren't happy to move forward will kind of fall behind unless they're like kind of gently brought along. But also, how much effort do you want to put into that when you also have the battle to win of getting rid of management who are causing all of like the actual the severe modern problems of the management issues of not sorting these problems out, and also all of the other stuff about, just general workplace abuses. Yeah.
That's the sort of thing where, I'd like to think that, people aren't, like, it's not a purely destructive thing. I mean, take an example like Jeff Kaplan. Definitely one of the old boys.
Of course.
But also seems to do pretty well by people. The fact that his whole username is a reference to big old titties, doesn't seem to have held back how he obviously could, move forwards, be a good team lead, seemingly to everyone on that team. But maybe there's people who, when maybe faced with whatever updating of things that Jeff Kaplan did personally, they maybe went in the other direction or decided not to do it at all.
Certainly seems that way.
There is a bit more, though. So there is Treyarch's response, Kotaku's blunder. And this is just a fun little thing on, I suppose you could say it's media spin. You could say it is the default opinion based on how everybody, journalists included, have been primed. I think one pretty good example of when this happened before that we fell into was The Last of Us Part 2.
Yes.
Where there was, a number of pretty prominent narratives that on sort of face value seemed to check out, but ended up being objectively false. Doesn't mean that I like the game. I do not like the game. I think it's some pretty baby tier writing, but we can get into that another day. But it was one of those things. It was very easy for everybody to just sort of ramble down the same path without really thinking about things. So it seems Kotaku kind of did that. Basically, Treyarch released this statement, and we would sort of say that it's decently standard stuff. Now, obviously, Dan Bunting was, what was his job title again?
He was studio head, I believe.
Yeah. So he was implicated in a bunch of stuff. The story basically goes that Bobby Kotick covered for him, and then he basically independently realized that his position was untenable, and then he left. But I think the big point there for people is that Bobby did try to make sure he was okay.
Yeah.
Even though he was doing stuff that, should have meant dismissal, from what we understand, that is. So with all of that happening and, and everything else, it's pretty obvious that the studio would want to put out its own statement, and that's exactly what they did. Now, are you going, could you take the default view of, big company covering ass, big studio covering its ass, default, let's be very cynical to it all. I think that's a pretty natural thing for people to think, given everything that's been going on. However, Kotaku got dragged over the coals for this. Mm-hmm. Because they went with the headline of Call of Duty Studio vaguely promises to do better a month after a sexual harassment report, to which a Treyarch producer, Miranda, said back, "A lot of us ladies at the company organized to write this and have published it." We are the ones that have been impacted the most by what has happened, and we are fighting for a better future. Change has to happen from within, and we are doing our best and would appreciate support. So I think that's just there being some frustration of, okay, Kotaku, we know you obviously took this in the most spicy angle, but then for the people who are actually trying to, be women in the industry and to help there be change and reform, it's not exactly supporting them.
Yeah. I guess it kind of comes down to like how difficult this stuff is to actually write, because it's either how difficult it is to write or how good like PR people are, because if you assume this was written by like the studio head before he left or something and it was just a complete passover, you're like, yeah, this is just words, it's not action. You can kind of see that and go, well, whatever. It's nicely written and all, but it's also kind of what a PR person would write.
Yeah, but it's the thing with spin.
Yeah.
Like, as an example, you look at any Riot presentation, there's loads of people who are not a bunch of white guys in those. And some people are going to look at that and say, oh yeah, I get it. Riot are just rolling out all of those people who don't look like, because of the case, and they're obviously doing this for image management purposes.
Yeah.
Some other people will look at that and say, oh, well, that certainly seems to be better then. Good, happy days.
Yeah.
What way do you take it? This statement. If somebody, let's just say you get, 10 journalists in this room, 10 journalists in that room, they all get a flashcard. One of them says, this following statement was written by, let's just say, man at studio. Or this statement was written by, say, group of women at studio. And then, the literal information of the statement is the same. How it's going to be received is going to be very different.
Yeah,
and I don't bring this up to make some sort of big, huge, sweeping point. It's just... kind of worth keeping that sort of thing in mind whenever processing information.
Yeah, I think it was funny that just the void of intent let people fill in their own intent.
Yeah.
And then they got correct. They're like, oh, shit, sorry, we completely misunderstood. Our bad. Like, that's kind of funny because nothing's actually changed except who wrote it.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, so... also corroborated by senior game designer Joanna. Happy that Treyarch have finally released the statement. This is not a PR stunt, but a sincere and heartfelt statement from the women of Treyarch. And absolutely, we wish them a success, in all of that. So that's where things currently are leaving us. Just an interesting little tidbit in Treyarch, and then I think a bit more substantially because it really has blown up that situation with Blizzard.
Yeah.
Ultimately, my reading this is companies are formed of people. Those people are groups. Within those groups, there's individuals. There's generally a hell of a lot more, diversity across individuals and stuff. So if you look at a really big company, you're obviously going to find the number of people who will congregate into the right wing of gaming Discord. You're going to find people of, all different sorts, be that Geoff, be that other people. This is an interesting story. I think it's kind of indicative that Geoff tried to get her fired using contacts, but sort of turned out his people weren't there anymore. That sort of indicates at least an instance of a tenured employee thinking they could do that.
Yeah.
So it's a sort of thing because I don't want to just say, oh, Blizzard staff found on this Discord saying these things, therefore that is what Blizzard staff overall, and especially historically, are like. Because that would be painting with a very broad brush.
Of course.
But from this story, we can glean some information. We just need to do so responsibly and not make the big sweeping statements, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I think the interesting thing to me is that this is one of the most visible cases of like a company's culture changing over time as time has passed and management not been able to do a very good job with it, in that they've not been able to, manage the way that are hiring people or how they're having people interact. And I guess it's going to happen in a large company where you end up having these splinter factions where people will just, dislike each other for, political or personal reasons. And that'll start to be this big overarching problem in the organization, as opposed to, making sure everyone's on the same page, working toward the same goal.
Yeah.
But I guess that's what happens when you become like a lifestyle company like Blizzard, where you're like, you are Blizzard, as opposed to, oh, I go to
Bleed
work.
blue.
Yeah, you go to work and then go, I can do my best at work and then take my own personal stuff home, and then we don't have to have that conflict in the office.
Yeah, you could kind of even strip this away from Blizzard. Look at a company like Goldman Sachs. Obviously, Coke, pretty big.
I can imagine.
Like, that's pretty much a known thing. So, you know, what if you have somebody who kind of comes from the, you know, Coke and drinking days, or even take that very big InfoSec company that is also in Belfast with a whole bunch of day drinking in their office.
Yep.
You know, what happens when it's like, that's a cool part of the culture where, you know, back in uni, because we were, you know, in and around computer science, it's like, that's a company you're like, oh yeah, they're really cool. You know, they pay really well. People have got a thing of whiskey in their locker, and it's going to be appealing to a certain type of person, obviously. So what happens in a company like that when all of these people kind of went up in the old way of doing things, which was, you know, Coke and boobs, pretty much. Well, what happens when that person has just got to face things changing? That's an example. It's an example because we know it's literally true. That's the thing. We know it's literally true that this shit goes on in some of these big companies. So it's like, you know, what would it be like changing that? I think with gaming, it's like slightly different, but sometimes it's useful to separate it from the company that we're talking about. Take a more generic case. And yeah, you're going to have the tenured people just thinking, well, you know, I crunched for 12 hours, did a few lines, we all got smashed. Did me good. And they're not going to like the new way. I think that's just going to happen. But ultimately, it's a massive failure of leadership. That any of this shit happened. Because you're going to get right-wing people, you're going to get left-wing people, you're going to get authoritarian people, you're going to get more sort of libertarian people. You're going to have people from all over. And ultimately, you're there as professionals to get a job done, and managing a company, leading a company, if you can't make that happen, like, your job is to have a diverse group of people from different backgrounds with different beliefs work together well. And if that doesn't happen at your company, to the point where you have little splinter groups forming, you've completely failed at management. That's that. So that's the takeaway. They completely fucked it up. And with that shocking surprise that you in no way, it's a conclusion you in no way came to before this video, and we certainly didn't come to that.
Nope, not at all.
It's not like it's been bloody obvious for ages. That's time to end. They completely fucked it up. Goodbye.
Good job, Blizzard.